Hey ladies, my name is Jenny Chaffetz and I am the host of Sideline Sisters. Are you a busy mom, powerhouse professional, or high-achieving go-getter? This show is for no BS women who want to be inspired to get off the sidelines of their lives. Ever feel like you're playing small or safe or just on autopilot? My guests are relatable women who've gone on a journey, overcome challenges, and lived to share the lessons that we want to hear. These conversations will be funny, sad, scary, wise, encouraging, and most of all, real. So whether you're driving, doing chores, exercising, walking the dog, or just laying on the couch, settle in and enjoy. I want to invite you to take back your power, reignite your passions, and step off the sidelines. Let's go. Hello, my friends, and welcome to my 50th birthday party. Yay! I am turning 50 next week, and to celebrate, I invited a very special person onto the show today. My name is Jenny Chaffetz. I'm the host of Sideline Sisters, and today I am joined by someone I have admired for quite a while now. Her name is Victoria Moran, and she is a powerhouse voice in the world of veganism, activism, yoga, and aging with purpose, style, and fabulousness. Cited by Veg News magazine among the top 10 living vegetarian authors, Victoria Moran has written 14 books, including the international bestseller Creating a Charmed Life, and her latest, Age Like a Yogi, A Heavenly Path to a Dazzling Third Act. Featured twice on Oprah and voted PETA's Sexiest Vegan Over 50 in 2016, she is the founder of Main Street Vegan Academy, training vegan lifestyle coaches, educators, and entrepreneurs, and lead producer of the 2019 documentary, A Prayer for Compassion. She lives in New York City. And fun facts about Victoria: with a $1 press card from a teen magazine, she attended her first Beatles press conference at age 14, and when she was 17, Paul McCartney bought her a drink. Victoria is absolutely stunning. She's accomplished, smart, talented, and has this vibrancy that comes out in the work that she does and the lives that she touches. It was her book, Main Street Vegan, that helped guide me as a new vegan, and I even contemplated attending Main Street Vegan Academy 5 years ago, and it looks like I am actually going to take her up on the offer she mentions at the end of the episode. Her newest book, Age Like a Yogi, is freaking amazing. It doesn't matter if you are into yoga or Ayurvedic medicine. You will find value if you are a person living in the world, aging, and desiring to do it in a healthier, more energetic way. So I encourage you to check out that book. And I just want to add before we get into the episode, as luck would have it, as soon as I stopped recording and said goodbye to her, I realized that there was a question I desperately wanted to ask her that I didn't get around to asking, and that is all about turning 50. So I didn't get to it. I didn't ask her about her own experience aging. But if you listen to her interview with Rip Esselstyn on the Plant Strong podcast, she does talk about the milestone of 50 several times in that conversation. So I will link to that and you can check it out. And before we get into the conversation, I want to remind you that next Thursday, August 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, I am hosting a free workshop over Zoom called Coping with Challenges, because aren't we all doing that all the time, every day? And wouldn't you like to do it in a more compassionate, healthy, supportive way? So I will have the link for that workshop in the show notes, and you can join me for that hour and learn how to cope with daily stress and massive obstacles with healthier mechanisms. Now, let's get into the conversation with Victoria. Okay, well, today is such a special episode on Sideline Sisters. As we can all see, I am turning 50 in a few days, and I wanted to mark this special occasion by interviewing someone
I deeply admire and who has been my role model for aging beautifully and vibrantly. So, Victoria Moran, welcome to Sideline
Hi.
Sisters.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor and pleasure.
Oh, it's all mine. So, when I went vegan almost 5 years ago, um, I read your book, Main Street Vegan.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was incredible. And I don't even remember how I stumbled upon that or you or the whole chain of events, but I did find it and I quickly realized it was like a Bible, like a roadmap, like the old AAA triptych on how to go vegan. It was mind-blowing in the best way and made the transition, which was very dramatic. I chose to do the overnight transition and it made it very smooth. Thank you for that. And over the years, I've continued to follow your content and just always be amazed by the things that you are doing and developing as you on planet Earth or by however we choose to explain it as you age. So you have this newish book out. I know it's been out for a few months. Age Like a Yogi, and we will get into a lot about that. And I will admit that I do not identify as a yogi, but you definitely make me curious or more interested in approaching that lifestyle. So let's begin with in the book, in this newest book, you talk about a woman named Iris
Oh,
repeatedly. And you talk about what an inspirational force this woman was for you and for clearly everyone she encountered. And now that it's been, what, 50 plus years since you met her,
mhm.
it seems just apropos to tell you that you're basically my Iris. So
Aw,
thank
oh.
you.
Well, that's a great compliment because I think we do need people, women in particular, if we're women who have done this before us. I had a wonderful conversation a Saturday morning with Stella Churfus, who was my first yoga teacher. She is
Mm,
100 now. She still teaches one chair yoga class a week. She lives in a third floor walk up. She's really remarkable.
hmm.
Another Iris. So,
Right?
Iris was a woman that I met in the spiritual library where I worked. And somebody's like, how can a library be spiritual? It's a library that focused on books about religion, philosophy, spirituality, that kind of thing. Part of the Theosophical Society in America, where I actually lived and worked at when I was 20 and 21. So Iris wasn't an actual employee. She lived in the town there, but she had been a theosophist forever, and theosophy is a kind of yoga-like philosophy, um, Eastern spirituality packaged for Westerners. But we would call on her, and she was late 70s, and she had wonderful white hair. And she'd walk in just like, I have arrived. And she didn't say that. She wasn't egotistical or anything at
Right.
all, but she just carried this light with her. And I remember that whenever I would complain, "Ooh, this is wrong, that's wrong," she would always say, "The darling physical plane." And that's
Oh,
kind of a yogic thing to say because in those kinds of traditions, we talk about different planes of being, the physical being the most dense and subtler planes of being, planes of understanding. But she just had this glow. And, I'm there, I'm 20, she's 78. And it's like, wait a minute. I'm supposed to have the glow of youth on my side. And here is this woman that could be my grandmother lighting up the room. What are we going to do about that? So, what I did was learn from her and from so many of these other amazing women who have come later. And to be able to pass that along to someone as wonderful as yourself, I'm truly honored.
thank you. Thank you. I'm here to receive the wisdom. So I'm sure you've told the story a million times. Were you already inclined to a life of service, activism, spirituality prior to age 20, let's say? I mean, how did you end up there in that role? And then where did you go from there? And I ask this because my son is turning 20 tomorrow.
Oh,
My daughter's not far behind, and that just seems like a very evolved state. And I'm so curious how that came to be and how that grew from there.
oh, well, I don't know if it's evolved or not, or if it's just that that's where my interests are. I think we look at young people and they all have these fascinating interests. They can just find out about something and just take it. I was just, something popped up on YouTube last night. It was an old What's My Line show from the early 60s. And they had this little girl who was then 6 years old, and she was a billiards player. And I Googled her to see if it was just a one-off, and she grew up to become one of the greatest billiards players of all time. So I think sometimes these things that we do when we're little kids are really significant. So for me, I was always interested in spiritual things. I remember my nanny taking me out in my stroller just before my third birthday. It was late at night. I don't know why we were out, except that maybe my parents were having an argument, but we were out and there were the stars, bright, beautiful stars. I don't see them much here in New York City, but we lived in Kansas City, so there were stars. And I remember thinking, okay, that's home. I'm
Mm.
here. I'm doing this. There is nothing wrong with it, but it is not home. And, looking back, it seems like very adult cerebral, kind of thinking, but I think we are. We show up here, I believe, as souls fully formed. We have to learn to operate a new body and whatnot, but we're not just these little creatures that don't have anything going on. So my interest was always the big picture, what it means. And that was underscored by another one of my many irises, and that's Dee Dee, who was a grandmother age nanny who was hired to come and take care of me when I was 6 months old, because both my parents worked, and this was before daycare. And Dee Dee had explored lots of different spiritual traditions. By the time she got to us, she had landed in Unity, which is a progressive Christian movement founded in the 1890s by ethical vegetarians who managed somehow to print their Bibles with faux leather in 1890s. Amazing. But anyway, she was always very open-minded about these things. She was the first person to tell me that vegetarians existed in the world. That was a big deal. I didn't know what to do with that information, but I filed it away thinking, ooh, vegetarians, ooh, that might be something to be. And yeah. And then when I was in seventh grade, lovely woman, I always say her name when I get a chance on podcast, just in case somebody knows her. Rebecca Gott lived with her mother there in Kansas City. And the mother was into Christian mysticism. And she had all these books like The Practice of the Presence of God and The Seven-Story Mountain and The Cloud of Unknowing. And we just ate those books up. I don't think we understood a word, but we at least carried them around, tried to get them by osmosis, read to the degree that we were able, because we were both just those kinds of kids who wanted to know the meaning of life. And that's what led me to yoga, vegetarianism, veganism, all sorts of exploring different kinds of spiritual traditions, and getting my degree, my bachelor's degree, which is the only one I have, in comparative religions and writing in the margins. Ooh, they said that in Taoism. Oh, Judaism said that too. I love the connections.
That's so beautiful. I mean, did you encounter any pushback from the concrete world? were your parents supportive of this? Did you have friends who were on board, or did people look at you and say, Victoria, what are you going to do with that degree? Or what do you plan to do with your life? This is, get your head out of the clouds.
Yeah. Well, but I went to college late and I started writing for publication when I was 14. I wrote for teen magazines, got into my first Beatles press conference when I was 14 and a half. And so by the time I went back to school at 28, I had a career as a magazine writer. And so everybody said, "Oh, you're going to go get your degree in journalism." And I was I'm like, "Why would I do that? I already do that." And I had
Right?
that quotation attributed to Einstein, "I want to know God's thoughts. The rest is incidental." That was what I was thinking too. And so that was the reason for that degree. And I think I was old enough that people didn't tell me, you should major in something else. But growing up, I think my parents, particularly my mom, didn't really know what to make of me. I was different from either of my parents. An astrologer once told me that Dee Dee, this lovely grandmother-aged nanny, uh, was my parent, that my parents had provided a body, and God bless them both. But I really I related much more to Dee Dee. So my mother, however, had grown up kind of just whatever kind of Christian church was nearby. They went to that. My dad was raised Catholic, and I was supposed to be brought up Catholic, and theoretically I was, but I was getting all this other information from Dee Dee. I remember learning the Lord's Prayer and wanting to add on, "For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever," which they don't say in the Catholic Church. And I remember Dee Dee whispering it to and another time I was explaining to the nuns about that Jesus wasn't the only avatar, because you could look at Krishna and Buddha, and there were others who had, come
Wow.
to be expressions of God on earth. And, the nuns didn't like that. And I was
Yeah.
telling Dee Dee, and Dee Dee said, "Oh, they mean well, they just don't get out much." So that was kind of my childhood. Plus, my dad was a doctor in Kansas City. When he'd opened his practice, the neighborhood was kind of Eastern European, Jewish primarily, and then it became more and more African American. So by the time I came along, it was a completely Black neighborhood. And so he had all of his Black patients, and then he had all of these other Eastern European patients who had largely moved away but would come back for their medical care. And as a result, I mean, we were going to bar mitzvahs and, Eastern Orthodox weddings and big Black Baptist funerals, and all these wonderful ways to kind of grow up in the United Nations of traditions, of
Yeah.
faith traditions. I was just talking to someone this morning. One of the projects I'm part of now is the Compassion Consortium, which is an interfaith spiritual center for animal advocates, co-founded by my husband and a colleague of his. They're both interfaith ministers. I'm the layperson tagging along. But anyway, I was interviewing a fascinating gentleman, Altamash Said. He's a Pakistani environmental and animal rights attorney.
Wow.
Just fascinating, fascinating person. And we were talking about how people use religion as one of the many ways to have reasons to disagree, when at the
Yeah.
heart and soul of every one of those wisdom traditions, there's the same stuff. And if we could
Yep.
just find that, we'd all get along a lot better.
Right? I know. I feel like that sentiment has come up so many times when I have conversations with growth-minded spiritual people is, God, if people just did A and B, wouldn't the world be better? Why is it so simple and so complicated at the same time? Which maybe transitions to a question that I have wanted to ask you. So I've gone down the rabbit hole of Victoria Moran, and I've listened to so many podcasts, read books, And there are things that you've said that have stood out to me that I want to go a little deeper on. So I heard you say in another podcast that it's about living a love-based life, and in doing so, if one chooses to follow that concept, then everything else takes care of itself. Can you speak more about that? Does it
Yeah.
really work like that?
Well, not I think in the way that we would hope. I know in a lot of kind of new age and new thought kinds of teachings, it's so easy to take some of that, like, oh, well, if I just visualize the 12th room mansion by the sea will show up. Like,
Mhm.
not often. But what I do think is if we've truly focused on our inner essence, which is love, then we know that we are connected to all living beings. And even though I understand there are some people who get way off course, you can't trust everybody. You can't walk up to everybody you see on the street and befriend them, unfortunately. But if you have this general idea that you are connected, a lot of great things are going to happen. One is, even if you happen to be alone, you aren't really alone. And you feel this incredible support. It's easier to find resources that you need when you feel that you're connected to everybody else instead of that you're at odds with everybody else, or you're trying to get something from them, but they're different from you. I think the other thing that happens with a love-based life is it fills this empty hole that Pascal called the God-shaped hole in every man that only God can fill. So, change the word God, change the word man, whatever
Sure.
you need to do, but the hole is still there.
Right.
And this love, I mean, it really, really fills it. And we know this because when we're in these intense love situations in our lives, when we are in love or even think we are, when we have a young child, a new dog, old dog, past
Any
dog,
dog.
we really get
Yeah.
this intense feeling of love. And I think if you're really doing this and you're doing a little spiritual practice here and there, sometimes you get these glimpses. And for me, one description of it is out to lunch with women friends, and I look around the table and think, my God, they're beautiful. Am I
Yeah.
hanging out with like ex-pageant people? I didn't think so. How'd they get so beautiful?
Right.
Well, that's because of how we're seeing. Or
Yeah.
every now and then I'll go in the subway and everybody looks like an angel. Not
Yeah.
every day,
Right.
but
Right.
every now and then. And it's just an uplift. It doesn't mean life will be perfect. Life is just very difficult, and it certainly doesn't get easier when you get older.
Hmm.
Statistically, you become more accepting, but there's a lot more to accept. And
Right.
yet, with that understanding of just at the center of who we are is this light, this love, this bliss. And to just remember that, I think is really helpful.
It's so true. And if someone listening has not had this experience yet, then I pray it happens soon because I have been in that environment. I went to a retreat back in April and it was 35 women, and it was just as you described sitting with girlfriends at lunch. I knew one person in the room. I went with my best friend and looked around at 33 strangers, and the overwhelm of compassion and appreciation and connection to complete strangers by just, it's, I guess, again, I'm not a yogi, but that whole the light in me sees the light in you. And it was like there were these almost like meteoric laser kind of connection beams between us.
I love it.
It
I
was
love
wild.
it. And I need to say too, because twice you've said you're not a yogi. When I was thinking of this title, Age Like a Yogi, it's really how can we age with spirituality at our center? And I've been around yoga a long time, and the great thing about yoga, and it's kind of Vedanta, which is a yoga-like thing too, is that all wisdom traditions are accepted. And so anybody that has any kind of spiritual life, whether it's attached to some tradition with a name or whether it's fully independent, I think is a yogi because yoga means union, union with ourselves, with one another, with the divine. So I think anybody who's paying attention to their inner is a yogi.
Okay, I will grasp at that. And frankly, I heard you say in another conversation that you had a different working title 5 years ago for the book. That is that correct? That in your head something about Iris?
Oh, that's right. Boy, you do have a good memory. Yes, I was thinking of calling it Becoming Iris, and it was just going to be about aging and
Hmm.
spirituality and that. But then with a nonfiction book, you start with a proposal. And so as I was writing and playing with it, I started to see that as we look at aging, very few readers only want to look at the inner part. It's like, okay, that's all great, and I'll die peacefully. Good for me. But between now and then, I want to live vibrantly and amazingly and
Yeah.
continue having adventures. And what I talk about that in the book on the physical sense is largely yoga's sister science of Ayurveda, which are these fabulous suggestions and tips for self-care, ways to get to know yourself really well. So Iris is definitely in there, but Age Like a Yogi was able to bring in yoga philosophy and Ayurveda, which is just the coolest thing. I
Mm,
discovered it in the 1990s, even though I discovered yoga in the 60s. Ayurveda kind of came a little bit later, but it's a lovely system that can be
yeah.
incorporated. And this is the other thing too. I think there was a time when people looked at ways of being in the world, and it was almost like pick one. And when I was little, people were still saying to little girls, do you want to be a mom or housewife, they would even say, or a career girl? I remember thinking, well, why can't I be both? Because my mom was. She was
Yeah.
completely, different. But I think we thought that like, well, I can only be, I can
Yeah.
see things this way. But the truth is, you can see things any way you see them. And if attaching some labels and going deep in a particular path makes sense, well, that's fine. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you changed the name because it does speak to a non-regular practicing yogi like
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
I did find while there is so much content in that book and it is magnificently dense with suggestions, it also wasn't preachy. It wasn't a set of rules. I found your tone very welcoming.
Oh, thank you. Well, I appreciate that because nobody likes being preached to.
No,
I mean, there's
no.
a very popular book that I will not name that's out there in the spiritual oeuvre of books and the genre that says something like at the very beginning, you might not read this book today, but you will read this book at some point. In other words, like, and it's like, you know what? I really wanted to read this book, but now that it's sort of, has become this sort of, you are now drafted, it's like, no, I think I'll pass.
No,
So
there's too much else out there. Unlike when you were a child and there were only three books in the library,
that's
now
right.
there's plenty to read.
Hey everybody, sorry for the interruption, but I have to tell you about the upcoming gentle coaching workshop called coping with challenges. Yeah, we all have coping strategies, but maybe yours are not the most healthy or supportive for your nervous system. If your go to coping mechanism is food, drink, shopping, gambling, scrolling, binging Netflix, perhaps denial and dismissal, then I want to invite you into this free workshop where we will explore other techniques that will be a little more conducive to overall well being, feeling content, serenity, and even better sleep. The workshop is Thursday, August 14th, 3 p.m. Eastern. The link is in the show notes to register. I really hope to see you there.
Gosh, there's so many things I want to ask you. With everything that you compiled into the book, all the different yogic ideas, all the Ayurvedic possible practices, and you did leave space for people to be individuals. What are your favorites, or what are the things that you feel most intensely about having in your life?
I think that meditation, I call it in the book the Swiss Army knife of the spiritual life. I think it's intensely important. And how you do it is up to you. Traditionally, yogically, was using a mantra, which can be, Om Shanti, something Sanskrit. It can be English, all is well, God is love, I am blessed. I don't care what it is. It's just something to focus on. And then some people just focus on their breath. It's more of a Buddhist tradition. But the idea of taking time every day, certainly in the morning, but ideally morning and late afternoon, kind of before dinner, it changes everything. So at its heart, it's spiritual practice. And if you really are into yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are the basic textbook of Raja Yoga or philosophical yoga. And all these other things that we think of as yoga, like the exercise part, the asanas, the breathing, it's all in service of getting to this place of dharana, dhyana, samadhi, of concentration, meditation, and bliss or connection. And in addition, ever since the early 1970s, we have known that meditation is remarkable for what it does for the physical body. People who meditate have fewer sick days. Their stress is massively reduced. It puts you in your parasympathetic nervous system, which these days is very hard to get to because we're under constant stress. Somebody always wants something, or we just happen to, open Instagram hoping we'll find a cat video. And what we find is some disaster just happened somewhere, or some dear friend just lost a relative. There's just so much. And so there are very few ways to get into that parasympathetic state. One way is body work. So you're lying on the massage table or you're getting acupuncture, which I was uh, had Chef AJ that a lot of people
Mm.
know on my podcast. We were talking yesterday, and she says she calls it acunapping because you're there.
Ah,
You'd think, well, how could you rest with needles in you? But they're just very, very tiny. You can't feel them, and it puts you in this almost sedated kind of state. Well, that's all great. And if you're rich and you can do that kind of stuff every day, maybe you wouldn't need to meditate for your physical well-being. But it's free
yeah.
and it works. So I think meditation, number one. Number two is some kind of movement. Now, obviously, I'm fond of yoga, hatha yoga, the movement kind of yoga. There are lots of different kinds of yoga now. And if you're looking into it, especially if you're over 50 or if you've got any kind of old injury, you want to really do a deep dive because the kind of yoga that was available when I started out was a classical hatha yoga. It was very simple. It was characterized by a hold in the posture. Now, when I say simple, I don't mean that there weren't extremely challenging postures for people who got to an advanced state of that, but a yoga class that you would just walk into was doable by almost everybody. And nowadays there's some
Yeah.
very rugged kinds of classes that
Hmm.
that you'd want to, yeah, if you're not in super good shape, you don't want to start with those. But really any kind of movement. If yoga is not your thing, but you do Pilates or running or fast walking or whatever it is, obviously you need to do something that's cardio, you need to do something that builds muscle and bone and something for flexibility. But I think, especially with aging, the exercise is the panacea. There's a wonderful book. There are actually two books. One is called Younger Next Year. The other is called Younger Next Year for Women. I think they came out in 2012 and 2013, written by a master's level skier and a medical doctor. And it's really the first one was for men, and the second one was pretty much the same book with a pink cover. It was for women. But the gist of it was really about exercise and the aging process. And something that I had never learned before is that in an um, like evolutionary sense, when you think back to prehistoric times, a great many humans did not make it through the winter. And they went into the cave and they just kind of hunched there to see if they were going to make it through, and they didn't move. And so the connection between the brain and the body became such that this person is not moving. Therefore, we don't need to mount an immune response. We don't need to send helpful hormones somewhere because this person is on their way out.
Right.
It's true today. And it
Yes.
doesn't matter if we're eating, amply. It's still, this body is not moving.
Yeah.
Don't help it.
Mm.
And so I think that's really, really important. And then the third thing that I would say, and when I talk about the meditation, it's meditation and spiritual connection, and then movement. And then number three is to eat food with life force intact. And there's so many reasons that I have chosen to be vegan. Mostly for me, it's the animals. There's heart disease in my family going back, I don't know, generations. And so we've known since 1990 that a reasonable, virtually vegan diet can not only prevent but reverse heart disease. Nothing's a panacea. Everybody gets sick, but it seems like a very wise thing to do. But for for the yoga point of view, it is so important on two levels to eat these wonderful plant foods. One is Ahimsa, that is the basic first moral tenet of yoga that translates as nonviolence or non-harming.
Hmm.
So we don't want to eat anything that kills somebody or caused somebody to suffer. And then on the other hand, for our own physical well-being, these kinds of foods, they're considered sattvic in yoga. So fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts and seeds. These are these beautiful, gentle foods. And of course, within that, you make your own choices. If something upsets your stomach or you're allergic, I mean, obviously you don't eat it, but there's 250,000 edible plants.
Right.
There's a lot out there. And I think just to really feed yourself food that has its life force intact. In yoga, we talk about prana, that life force energy. And so beautiful, colorful foods. So those would be my three.
Perfect. I love that.
Mhm.
Now, you alluded to the fact that yoga has, in its presentation in modern day, is different than decades, centuries, millennia of past. Every corner has a yoga studio on it. And most people I know have tried a yoga class, go regularly. But the thing that I find interesting is the last point that you made, that a massive tenet of yoga is this nonviolence core belief. But I would say most people I know who have a regular yoga practice do not have any connection to food consumption. I don't know. Has something changed? The belief is still there in the yogic tradition. So why is it that you learned long ago, if I'm following this movement path, well, then it affects my eating. What's different today?
Well, yoga has become huge. And in all honesty, I didn't know how huge it had become until I wrote this book because I'm a writer. I've been a writer, as I said, since I was a kid. And the idea that a writer who is willing to research something can't write about anything, I still don't get it. But now we're supposed to be in these categories and these platforms. In other words, what do your people on Instagram and Facebook know you for?
Mm,
And even though I've been doing yoga for well over 50 years, I'm not in that yoga world. And it's a world, and I guess that's just what happens when things get to be very big. But what also happens is that the things that people like the most get focused on, and the things that they're not so interested in kind of fall away. And particularly for Americans, we really want to look good. We like the idea of movement and exercise and athletics, and we really honor athletes. And so a lot of yoga has taken this very athletic turn. If you look at Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, asana, which is what would now be, considered the poses or the exercises, asana actually means easy, relaxed position. And basically, all Patanjali had to say about asana was find an easy, relaxed position so that you can meditate for a long time. But over time, as things evolve, and everything does, um, people did start doing some of these exercise practices to help with that. And in the Middle Ages, a book came out called the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which had the basic yoga postures, most of them based on observations of nature, observations of animals. This is why yoga poses are
huh.
called, cabot and cabot, camel and rabbit, uh, and
Dog, downward dog, cow.
all those.
Yeah.
Um, and so as yoga came to the West, it's very interesting. The first yogi to come to America was Swami Vivekananda in 1893. And if anybody really likes spirituality and really likes history, as I do, I would invite you to Audible and look up Swami Vivekananda recording because there's a little recording of him speaking at the Congress of the World's Religions in Chicago in 1893, part of the World's Fair there. And I didn't even know they could do recordings in 1893, but evidently they could. And to hear this beautiful, robust voice speaking with pride of coming from India, which was this place that accepted all religions. And he explained that after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, that Jews came to India and were welcomed and accepted, and the Zoroastrians, when they were run out of Persia, were warmly invited to India. And it's like he could be talking today, except it was way back then. And so that was what came as yoga. And then a little bit later, we got Swami Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda. I'm sorry, not Swami. Well, he was a Swami too. Swami Paramahansa Yogananda, who started Self Realization Fellowship. And again, he brought this beautiful philosophy. I remember when I was 18, coming back from London on a plane, I read one of his little books, and one of the quotations has stayed with me. He wrote, "At the center of peace I stand. Nothing can harm me here."
Wow.
I mean, I have used that so many times over these many decades. So that was coming. But the Hatha Yoga came too, and the exercise parts, and then some different schools of that were very much focused, on the physical. And that's what people have gravitated toward. But what I think is so important now is to remember that in even the physical kinds of yoga, the schools in India that were training people and including the yoga posture practice as well, you had to master the moral precepts and the personal disciplines first. And the very first one was Ahimsa, and that's nonviolence, and that includes nonviolent dining. And now I know I said earlier that I don't like people being preachy, and some people are saying, hey, I guess she was being preachy. But it's basically what can you do within your own worldview and what you believe and what you think is important and what you think is right? What can you do to make your life as a whole less violent and the foods that you choose less violent? Maybe you'll do Meatless Monday, or maybe you won't. It's like I offer ideas because they're, important to me. But yoga has always stood for peace to all beings. And that's actually a beautiful book by Judy Carmen, Peace to All
Mm,
Beings. And it's also stood for taking really good care of the physical body. Because again, how they came up with these beautiful sattvic foods, the fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. Now, I will admit that in ancient times, they came up also with dairy,
hmm.
milk from
Yeah.
healthy cows.
Yeah.
And there's religious tradition in India where Krishna was raised by milkmaids, and there's all that kind of stuff. But so many of the spiritual teachers today from India have seen that to truly honor the sacred cow is to not steal her milk and steal her babies and let her end up in a bad state. So that's how, for me, yoga is vegan. There's a podcast. It's not going on anymore. I think maybe the archives are still out there. It's called Yoga is Vegan with Holly
Yeah.
Stodas. Beautiful, beautiful podcast she did for several years.
Yeah. It's like how we started the conversation today, that whole, if we did A and B, or those simple things would result in a peaceful world. And it seems so obvious to you and to me now that I have transitioned to a vegan life, that clearly the animal food industry is violent. I do not want to consume that. I do not want to promote that. And it's common sense to us to want to remove as much violence from the rhetoric, from the consumption, from the marketing, from commerce. It just seems so obvious to me. So I'm a little sad that this beautiful tradition has found its way into the weight loss industry, and less so in its roots. But
Well, and
uh,
it's funny too when you talk about that, because I remember traveling in that part of the world in India, Nepal, Tibet. This was the early 90s when the first edition of my book, The Love Powered Diet, which was my story of overcoming an
mhm,
eating disorder, binge eating, and food addiction. And I did lose some weight. And so people ask, what's your book about? And I would say, well, it's a book for people who eat too much. And they would laugh. They thought that was a joke. How could you eat too much? And things are probably different now. There's a lot more prosperity in India than there was then, but there was still this idea of, I mean, eating too much is just this great blessing, and nobody gets the opportunity very
right.
often.
Pardon the interruption, but I have to tell you about my absolute favorite place on planet Earth. It's called Canyon Ranch. Have you ever heard of it? It is a wellness resort, and there are several locations in the United States. I have been to the one in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, and I'm telling you about it so that you can enjoy 10% off this spectacular place. Everything from the food, the staff, the facilities, the workshops, the exercise classes, the overall vibe, it's first class. So I hope you will check it out. You can book online or over the phone using code SIDELINE to save 10%. And now let's get back to the show.
So I think that it's all about being open, and it's like anything else. You start doing yoga, and if you really look into it, you're going to find this other stuff. Maybe it won't come at your yoga class at, the hot yoga studio, the health club, or wherever you are, but if you look, it's there.
Yes, yeah, you and I can pray for that. Um, so another thing that I heard you mention in other interviews is uh, living by doing the next indicated thing. I
Yeah.
love that. And it was so fascinating to me that, I mean, I just heard it in an interview I listened to yesterday, and it's like it hit me over the head with a brick because I just in the last few days encountered a situation in my own life. And let me back up. So, since I first read about you, learned about you, read the book 5 years ago, I contemplated joining your program, Main Street Vegan Academy, and I considered that certification. And I ended up going in a different direction and getting life coaching certification elsewhere. But it's always been there in the subconscious, it's should I have done that? Could I still do that? It's still there. And so in the meantime, I have been wanting vegan community. And so I found this other community, and a conflict arose between me and the founder of that group just in the last few days. And it led me to think, do I pivot? I don't know if that's the right community for me. There should not be this kind of conflict in a group that is supposed to bring me joy and connection. And when I heard you say the next indicated thing, it was like not just a light bulb. It was, a Times Square jumbotron lit up saying, I think this is the next indicated thing for me. That it's not that if that community is creating so much strife in something that is supposed to be so aligned and beautiful, maybe this is my sign to follow the next indicated thing. So where did that originate for you? Where that
Oh,
belief system?
yeah. Well, first, I'm very honored, and I hope that the next indicated thing for you is Main Street Vegan Academy because it's a magical program. I only created it to be excellent. I didn't know it was going to be magical. It
Mm.
has been since its beginnings in 2012, training and certifying vegan lifestyle coaches and educators. Um, it's The next indicated thing is actually one of the slogans in the 12-step programs, where there's just so much wisdom and which
Yeah.
has been so meaningful and important in my life.
Yeah.
And I kind of stole it and used it for one of my little essays in my book called Creating a Charmed Life, which was a charmed book. It's 250,000 copies and
Wow.
foreign rights to 32 countries, which I think is probably more than all my other books put together have sold. But anyway, yeah, the next indicated thing is the idea that we really do have this inner wisdom. But if we overthink it, like, okay, what should I do? What should I do? Let's see, maybe I need a sign, maybe I need to call somebody. And it's just like, "Ooh!"
I've never done that. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, well, good.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but the next indicator thing, and it's usually so simple. It's
Yeah.
just like a roadmap, like right now in my life. The next indicated thing is to continue this conversation as long as you want to continue it with the prayer that I want to use the word channeling because this is me, but that the highest and best in me is coming out and not just
Yeah.
some kind of ego stuff that I need to say because I feel like saying it. And then the next indicated thing, after that will be I see my little dog here at the end of the bed. It's going to be time to take him out and then preheat the oven because I need to get lunch for my husband. And it's never go change the world, but one after another, it does change the world, in ripples.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's also it's such a great boon for anxiety. And this is really the age of anxiety. I mean, young people are in such vast numbers on anti-anxiety
Yep.
medications, and people are just scared to death, and with good reason oftentimes. But the idea of, I can't change international policy. I can't even change the billions of land animals and, including fishes, trillions of animals killed every year for food, which to me is an important thing. But
Yeah.
what I can do is the next indicated thing, which
Right.
is eat a vegan meal,
Mm.
smile at somebody. If one of those international issues is truly tugging at my heart, write a letter, post something kind, and just keep it going, because it seems to me that that's how the universe speaks to us. Very seldom do people get, these aha experiences and burning bushes and genies coming out of bottles. Most of the time, it's this little quiet nudge of the next indicated thing.
Mm. And if you're living a love-based life, then chances are doing the next indicated thing will be kind, will be rooted in love and beauty and connection.
Yeah, we would hope, and then sometimes, yeah, I mean, you can be just the best person ever, and you don't get enough sleep one night and you can be all snappy and nasty. So it's oh,
That was a question I
darling
wanted,
physical plane, as Iris would say.
right? That was a question I wanted to ask you is how do you deal with difficulties? You have this enormous arsenal of tools, strategies, and clearly decades of experience and wisdom to draw from. But when you come up against something difficult, something hard, what do you do? What is that like?
Well, often I fail. I think there's something in the Bible about lean not on thine own understanding. And I think my way that I do things, and maybe most people, is that's the first thing we try. We lean in our own understanding and
Yeah,
like, well,
yeah.
what can I do? How do I
Yep.
fix this?
Yep.
And that can last for a while. But if you're going through something that is an ongoing challenge, something that's really difficult and that doesn't look like it's going to turn itself around anytime soon, then I believe, our personal ego understanding, regardless of how much we know, how many books we've read, how many cool quotes we can say, it just isn't enough. And so it calls, in my view, for translating spiritual practice into spiritual wherewithal. People often use the analogy of money in the bank. Every time you meditate, that puts some money
Yeah.
in your serenity bank and you can use it when you need it. And I think when things really go wrong, it's about making that withdrawal. And and oftentimes we're not used to doing that. It's like we do these things every day, whether it's, yoga or contemplation or, whatever we do that's self-care, personal growth, etc. But then when all hell breaks loose, and it's happening, I think now for a lot of people. I mean, I realize I'm at the age where a lot of contemporaries are, get sick, die, but people of all ages that I know, in real life, online, the things that they're being met with are just astronomical. And so for me, it takes all I've got. Sometimes it takes more than I've got. And sometimes I just need help. So in recent years, the biggest challenge for me has been my husband's health and subsequent disability. He fell onto the tracks just before the pandemic. And because it wasn't a stroke or a heart attack, they just sort of wrote it off as, oh, must have fainted, must have passed out. And it was just this random thing. Well, what we have learned years later, after other incidents and a lot of damage to his brain, was that he has a seizure disorder and that he
Mm.
actually showed signs of as a child, but then went away and nobody thought about it again. So what that means is he has some mobility issues and he has aphasia. As every year, it seems like there's been another kind of crisis that has made things harder. And, my own understanding was working there for a while, and I was doing, the superwoman thing, and
Yeah.
it was all great. And then last fall, he'd made so much progress with the aphasia and a really intensive speech therapy program. And then he had another event and lost all of it and more besides.
Oof.
And that just about took me under. And what helped me, frankly, more than the spiritual practice or more than, what I carry with me is the fact that my oldest friend, I don't want to say oldest like she's old, but she's my friend I've had the longest,
Yeah.
came out from Chicago. My friend Rita, she was going to stay about 3 days. She ended up staying 2.5 weeks until I just got it together so
Mm.
much that she could leave. And then the spiritual did come in. And one of my friends, who's one of these interesting vegans, some vegans are just so incredibly healthy. It's just like, whoa, where'd you get your kale? But he and his wife have not seen a medical doctor in over 35 years. And he said, whenever something, isn't quite right, we call a Christian Science practitioner. Well, I told you about Didi and Unity
Hmm.
is a New Thought tradition. And so is Christian Science, although it's a little bit more orthodox than the other ones. But I thought, you know what? I need help with not crying all the time and just feeling like I can't do this. And so I found a Christian Science practitioner, and that was very, very helpful. And for me, it caused that depression, the fact that I was crying a lot and that I wasn't sleeping well. And working with her caused that to lift.
Mm.
And it's humbling. It would be much better to come on here and say, oh yes, whatever happens to me, I just meditate and I stand on my head for a while and I got it taken care of. But that's just not, the way it is for me. I'm sure it is for some people and good for them. But for me, I needed help, and it was my friend Rita and the Christian Science lady. And because of them, I'm on a nice, even footing now so that I'm able to do the meditation and standing on my head and, acunapping and other good things.
I think that's what people need to hear. You talked about not speaking from ego and channeling wisdom. That's brilliant right there, and relatable. I mean, the people who listen to this podcast are women, let's say, I don't know, 40 to 80, and there's a good chance a lot of them are dealing with caregiving, whether it's for an aging parent or a partner, maybe even a child. Who knows what's going on in the family? But caregiving was not in my vernacular 20 years ago, but now I'd be surprised if I could toss a rock out the window and not have it reach someone who's got caregiving in their world. So thank you for speaking so relatably, so honestly about that.
My pleasure.
Well, as much as I would love to do this for the next 3 straight days, I don't want to monopolize your whole world. Oh gosh, let's maybe try to wrap it up with you sharing with this audience. Maybe is there a particular piece of advice that perhaps is nestled in one of your books that the audience hasn't read, what would you want to tell the women listening? What do you want them to know most? What in your 75 years of growth and evolution, what do you want us to know?
I'm going to quote Auntie Mame. It's my favorite movie, 1958 Rosalind Russell version, Auntie Mame. She said, "Life is a banquet, and most poor suckers are starving to death." So I would strongly encourage all of the women listening 40 to 80 and at the edges of those two ages, do something every single day that lights you up. And wherever you are in life, whatever difficulties you might be facing, whatever limitations you might have, whatever your bank account is telling you, or whatever the doctor is telling you, you can find a way to light up your life. And without that, it's very easy to fall prey to anxiety and depression and the general gunk that not only brings us down individually, but we talk about ripple effects in a good way, like, "Ooh, I did this happy thing, and it all ripples out, makes everybody I come run into happy." Same way, other way. So lots of times we don't want to do things for ourselves because we've been told not to be selfish. But if we don't, then our ripple's going to be all muddy. So, find a way to light yourself up today, and every day. It changes over time, but it's still a light.
Yeah. Wow. Mm, that's good. All right, Victoria, can you please tell the audience where to get more of you?
Oh, bless your heart. Well, I got a bunch of websites. So, victoriamoran.com is my author website. So, if you like books and you're interested in books and the writer's life and more about Age Like a Yogi, my latest title, you can go to victoriamoran.com. If you are interested in Main Street Vegan Academy, checking it out, becoming a vegan lifestyle coach, educator, or entrepreneur, that is mainstreetvegan.com. And I'll actually share, we're doing this huge discount for the 2025 fall program only, simply because the world is a mess. And there needs to be as many people out there able to make a difference as possible. And vegan lifestyle coaches and educators do that. So the code is FRIEND, FRIEND, because you're friends of this podcast, so you're friends of mine. And that'll get you 50% off the program that starts in late September. So go to mainstreetvegan.com, read up, see what you think. Then, if you like movies, we have a movie in development, a feature film, family feature film, Miss Liberty, about a cow who escapes from a slaughterhouse. And that is MissLibertyTheMovie.com. I mentioned the Compassion Consortium, which is the spiritual center, interfaith. If you are any faith or none, you're more than welcome. And that is compassionconsortium.org. And then I'll just give you one last thing, which is how to find me on a lot of social media: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. That's at Victoria Moran, author.
Hmm. And you didn't even mention the podcast, did you?
Main Street Vegan podcast has been going close to weekly for 13 years.
That right there is,
I mean, I am so proud of that podcast. It's won a bunch of awards, and that's cool. But some of those episodes, and I don't know when this one's going to come out, yours.
any day now.
Any day now. Okay, because the one that I have coming at the end of this week when we're talking, so it'll probably be there if people want to look, is a conversation with Chef AJ. And those of you who know her know that she's been very vocal about her lung cancer
Mhm.
diagnosis and experience. And we've known each other for a really long time. We have a lot in common. And I just think of all the interviews that I've done. over 500, well over 500 now, that this might just be the most energetic. So good time to
Wow.
check out the Main Street Vegan podcast.
Yeah, yeah. I've followed her for a long time. Again, being a loyal listener to the exam room, I'm quite familiar with her and her recent journey. So I'm excited for that. Thank you. Well, in conclusion, I want to invite you to raise your green juice or whatever you have handy and let us say cheers to doing something every day that's fun and lights you up.
Light yourself up.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Victoria Moran, this has been such an incredible birthday present to myself. So I am enormously grateful to you for saying yes and finding the time to fit this into your clearly busy schedule. And I just can't think of a better way to honor this milestone of 50 with
Yeah.
someone who has been doing phenomenal work in the world for 50 plus years.
Well, happy birthday, happy decade, and happy half century.
Many more to come, right?
Absolutely.
While I love interviewing all of my guests on this show, there is something additionally special when I have the opportunity to be face to face with people I admire, people I have looked up to as role models for long periods of time. And today was one of those occasions. Victoria Moran is so significant in my vegan journey, and I'm just so grateful that she took the time to be here. Now, let me get into Victoria's notes from the sidelines. Number one, women need other women to admire, women who have gone before and done things so that we can look to them and appreciate their journeys. Number two, if we truly focus on inner essence, then we will find the love, we will feel the love and see that we are all connected. And when you have that realization that we're all connected, good things will happen. That empty hole we were feeling inside will fill. Number three, yoga means union with ourselves, others, and the divine. And if you're paying attention to your inner self, you're a yogi. Number four, I love how Victoria said meditation is like a Swiss Army knife of a spiritual life. So whether you use a mantra or just focus on your breath, take time every day, ideally in the morning and again late afternoon, to meditate. Number five, another important thing to include in your life is movement. And it's best to include all three elements of cardio, muscle and bone building, so strength work, and also flexibility. Because the body-brain connection is real, and if your body isn't moving, your brain will tell all the neurotransmitters and things within you that you don't need help. Number six, equally as valuable as meditation and movement is eating food with life force intact. Ahimsa is the first moral tenet of yoga, and it addresses nonviolence. So consider that when you are eating. Try a snack, a meal, a day, eating foods with life force intact that came to your plate in nonviolent ways. Number seven, we talked about the importance of the next indicated thing. We have inner wisdom. But if we overthink and ruminate, we get lost in it. The next indicated thing is usually so simple, and by doing the next indicated thing over and over and over, we have the opportunity to change the world. So pay attention to those quiet nudges from the universe. Number eight, when we meditate, we are making spiritual deposits into a serenity bank so that when things get really bad, we can make a withdrawal. And sometimes when things are really difficult, we need help. So we can call on friends or, as Victoria suggests, a Christian Science practitioner. And number nine, do something every day that lights you up. If you don't, it's easy to fall into anxiety and depression. So remember, it's not selfish to do things for yourself. It's helping with the ripple effect of good things. You can check out the show notes for all the ways to follow Victoria and access more of her brilliance. And I just want to thank you for tuning in and helping me celebrate my 50th birthday, which will continue next week in my conversation with the phenomenal Dr. Jody Carrington. You don't want to miss that one. She is beyond hilarious and so wise. And also remember to check the show notes so that you can register for the Coping with Challenges workshop that is on Thursday, August 14th, 3 p.m. Eastern. It's free and I would love to see you there. I thank you for the birthday wishes and I'll see you right back here next week. Cheers to you.